add?
Well, I think we ought to chat a little bit about, how to think about renouncing U.S. citizenship. I don't actually think that it's necessarily whether you're a covered expatriate or not. I don't think that when people, I actually do not think that as high a percentage of people as are imagined are renouncing specifically because of tax issues, okay? They're renouncing because of the, what they accurately perceive as the very intrusive regulatory regime, and because U.S. citizenship is a problem living outside the United States, either for access to financial accounts or, because they're dual tax residents in another country. And I find that people approach this and they think about it for a long time, as if they can somehow arrive at some right answer to this question. And unfortunately, what making a decision means in the context of citizenship renunciation is not getting a right answer, but trying to decide which set of circumstances you'd rather live with going forward in life, recognizing that, you're just doing the best you can. And I think that people tend to overthink this. I think this is something that, people should feel their way through. Okay. The problem is that nobody can ever reach a decision that they're completely happy with. Okay. I mean, U.S. citizenship has some value. There's no doubt about it. It's just that the cost of having it is so high, unless you want to live in the United States, that people, are feeling they're forced out of it. And I'll kind of close with this, that I had a discussion with somebody yesterday who, he contacted me a few years ago at least. And, he'd sent me notes, I don't know, 2 or 3 times in a period of 2 or 3 years, right? And so he signed up for a consultation, and, so I met him and had a discussion with him this week. And what struck me about it was that this guy had obviously been thinking about this for a few years. And, I said to him, do you really want, he was like, he's about 70, okay, so he's older than your group. But I said, do you really want people at your celebration of life delivering a eulogy saying, well, this person spent the last 5 years of his life thinking about whether to renounce U.S. citizenship? I don't think this is worth the effort that a lot of people put into it. That makes it even worse. I think the question is simply, which set of circumstances would you rather live with, right? And so much of this depends on where people are, their stage in life. I mean, I think for young adults starting out in life, I think U.S. citizenship has far more value, because of the job market or what have you in the United States. But as you get older, the value diminishes every year. You're not building a life there. You've got no access to health care, long run, things like that. And the older people get, or the more they, their lives get sorted out and they get integrated into other countries. For example, professional licenses that aren't easily transferable. I think the less they're giving up.
So you think the sooner the better in terms of renunciation?
No, not necessarily. I think it depends on individual circumstances. I am not, by the way, okay, you might think so, but I'm actually not a huge advocate of renouncing U.S. citizenship for everybody, right? I think that for younger people, I think they ought to keep it and organize their lives to, survive it until they reach the point where it's clear that the costs are simply too high. Or that, it's not reasonable to expect any move there for employment purposes or career purposes. I think this is all very individualized. However, I will say this, that U.S. citizenship is the only citizenship in the world that has clear, identifiable benefits in renouncing. For many people, it's the single best financial investment they'll ever make in their lives. Oh, for sure. Oh, not a joke, because of the double taxation, which does exist contrary to what the tax preparers tell you, because of the punitive US taxation of non-US assets, think PFIX, et cetera, et cetera. But I would also say that for many people, renunciation of US citizenship can be a very, very important estate planning vehicle, right? Now, these would be for very high net worth people, but I mean, let's say you've got, well, let's look at, Ron Wyden's Billionaires Tax Act that he proposed, a couple of weeks ago. And, he wants to go after these people. And it's very, very clear that for somebody like, first of all, if you had $1 billion, you're going to be subject to the US estate tax, right? Which is going to be very, very high. Aren't you better off renouncing and paying a 23.8% capital gains tax instead of a 40% estate tax?
Yeah, it starts making more sense when you hit a certain.
Yeah, that's right.
level.
So, I mean, this is extremely individual dependent conversation, and I hope that for anybody listening to this, I mean, I know it's always great to hear somebody talk about this for a while, but I think that I'm not I think it ought to be clear to any reasonable listener of this that this is a highly circumstance dependent decision. Okay, I would also add there are people who should absolutely not renounce. Not renounce. And these would be people who would have, I mean, remember how the estate tax rules in the United States, right? If you're a non-resident alien, meaning a non-citizen, and let's say you own, a $10 million piece of real estate in the United States and you own it personally, they're gonna subject that to an estate tax when you die. They're gonna want like 40% of that. If you're a non-resident alien, if you're a US citizen, though, you avoid that.
Right.
Okay.
If you have a lot of US assets, you
Yeah.
want to
There
keep
are
being
also
American.
circumstances where, under certain tax treaties, US citizens get preferred benefits. I think I remember mentioning to you, to your amazement, and I think in our first podcast, how US citizens in France, as per the treaty, basically avoid French tax on, certain kinds of US investment income. So, I mean, this is not a simple thing. There are a lot of bells and whistles. So much of it depends on what you're left with, right after that I think that people should get help. Okay. I think I think that almost all of them need it, in varying degrees, but citizenship renunciation certainly can be an estate planning tool for a lot of people, et cetera, et cetera. And, all of this is the result of an archaic, deplorable, indefensible, immoral system of taxation.
I'd be so down for just a flat tax or something.
The US tax system has to go partly because it's not only is it outrageously unfair. I mean, think of it. Americans abroad are subjected to a more punitive tax system than resident Americans. We've talked about the exit tax rules that apply more punitively to Americans abroad. It's an outrageously fair tax system with different rules applied to categories of people, without regard to much else. But that's only the beginning of the problem. The compliance with it is practically impossible. As an expatriation lawyer, I see people's tax returns because they need to be compliant for 5 years. And, many of them have severe compliance deficiencies they don't even know about, right?
Yeah, I'm sure you have some
And then
worse
you got the
stories.
cost of it. Then you got the sheer cost of it. It can be. I mean, I was in Europe last month, and I was at a dinner, and this guy told me, I didn't press him on this, whether this is really true, but I did ask him to repeat it. Okay. He told me that his US tax, he's a US citizen, his US tax compliance costs are $40,000 a year. All right, now maybe depending on what's going on, but what was interesting to me, he said, and by the way, at the end of it, I never owe any US tax. Right. I mean, if that isn't just a pure tax on citizenship.
Compliance is expensive. Hey, I have a question for you, John, before we wrap up. What's your over under on Canada implementing citizenship based taxation? A lot of people have been predicting this.
I don't think it's very, very likely at all. Partly because it's not easy to sever tax residency from Canada. Tax residency in Canada is based on a test called being ordinarily resident. And what that means, if your center of gravity, if your spouse and kids are in Canada, you're going to be a tax resident. Et cetera, or the 183-day thing. And Canada also imposes a departure tax. It's not as brutal as the US tax because it excludes pensions, but it is a departure tax. I think that because you can't just leave Canada and also, if you become a treaty non-resident, you're still subject to the departure tax. I don't think that Canada's got any problems with this at all, frankly. You leave, you pay the departure tax. I mean, I would think that Canada would be wanting to get rid of people, so they, shake them down for. I don't think it's very likely. Why? What are you hearing?
Nomad Capitalist has predicted could be as soon as within the next 5 to 10 years. I definitely see it. I mean, the deficit keeps growing and Canada likes copying everything the US does. And so many Canadians are starting to leave for more than 6 months a year and get tax residency in Costa Rica and whatever. And they probably want to do something to cut down on that. Also, Australia implemented like a light form of citizenship-based taxation recently with some weird rules. And it's not all or nothing. I feel like some countries are starting to introduce elements of citizenship-based taxation, not as all out as the US, but pieces of it inspired by the US. And I'm sure it'll creep into larger and more onerous taxation over time.
Yeah, so what you're talking about are rules that make it more difficult to sever tax residency with Canada. Okay. I would agree that I think all of these countries are likely to pay more attention to what it means to sever tax residency. But I think this is partly the result of the whole remote work thing, et cetera. I mean, if somebody, let's say a Canadian moves to anywhere, say the Bahamas, and works on their laptop there. Presumably is their work sourced outside Canada? I don't know. I think it might be. I think that this is a problem that a lot of countries are dealing with, the digital nomad, the remote worker thing. But this has nothing to do with citizenship. Okay, what this has to do with is, are you able to define work as being sourced outside the country, et cetera?
Yeah, it's two things, right? It's like you said, it's going to get harder to leave the tax residency and leave the tax system of a lot of these countries, of Canada, of Europe, et cetera. And then the other piece, I guess, is maybe countries implementing more citizenship-based taxation. So I think two different things, but I think they are interrelated.
Well, we'll see. I'm going to guess no on the citizenship taxation thing. I think that that this type of decision is so monumental that I think they'd probably all countries should look at the US experience and the horror of it. So I'm going to guess no on that. But that's a different issue from, uh, playing around with the rules for severing tax residency and rules for income sources and things like that. So we'll see. I mean, I do agree that taxation is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. Um, and I think that people ought to be paying attention to that. Because of that, I do agree that generally speaking, the more opportunities people have to live outside their country of residence, definitely the better. We'll see. But something as draconian as the US system, I would find hard to imagine.
Maybe we can leave it on that. So,
Why don't we leave it on this?
yeah.
It's because of US citizenship taxation, the sun never sets on the injustice of the US tax system. Like that.
Well, we can only thank justice warriors like yourself, John, for fighting the good fight, helping US citizens get this whole mess sorted out. Obviously, you have a very specialized skill set, so we're very happy that you took the time today to speak with us. Maybe you could take this moment to tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, if you were to go to my website, which is citizenship solutions, plural.ca, and citizenship solutions.ca, or I guess a lot of people are aware of me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is expatriation law, expatriation, expatriation law. And, I'd be glad to help you think your way through this problem, which is not a simple problem. I mean, let me say this. Look, all citizenships have value, okay? And there are people who are willing to pay, look at the EB-5 program, substantial money to get US citizenship, or in that case, the green card leaving to citizenship. I don't think they're fully informed. That's my view of that particular program. But this is all relative, right? I mean, it's one thing for, people like me who are sitting here in a first world democracy, to downplay the value of US citizenship. But, there's a lot of people in the world who would be glad to have it. And I think that that's worth being part of the thought process and the discussion.
Yep, everyone's citizenship situation is different. And I guess we can only recommend that people reach out to John Richardson personally if they want help with their situation. I'd add you could probably mention My Latin Life, that you heard about John through My Latin Life, and John will treat you super nice. Again, John Richardson, counselor for U.S. persons abroad. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Thanks everyone for listening.